Hello guys, welcome to another video. And in this one we're going to be taking a bit of a break from the Forgotten Unique series for a bit of Path of Exile 2 discussion, because we've had a bunch of new information coming out about Path of Exile 2 in the past week or so. First we had the controller trailer, which is quickly becoming one of the most watched videos ever posted on the Path of Exile YouTube channel. In that trailer we learned about crossplay and cross progression, along with couch co-op. Three things that we didn't know about before, and honestly, couch co-op for Path of Exile 2, that's something I would never have expected to be a thing, but here we are. Then following that trailer, GGG held an event in LA to test out these new systems. They flew out a bunch of creators. They had couches set up there with consoles, and I think most, if not all of the participants at that event were in pairs to test out the co-op feature. And it looked like a ton of fun, and in fact the footage in the background is Talkative Try's gameplay footage from the event. Thank you to Talkative Try for letting me use that footage in this video. And honestly, from all of the footage that I've seen, Path of Exile 2 just looks phenomenal. The gameplay looks really smooth. It somehow looks like it's been massively improved from just 3 months ago when they had the previous event in LA. You may remember that just before Necropolis League, they had a similar event to test the PC version of the game with mouse and keyboard, and the general sentiment from that event was a positive one, but one that echoed the opinion that the game had a long way to go just yet. But for this couch co-op event, Path of Exile 2 looks like it's really beginning to take shape now. And just yesterday we received the news, not in an official capacity, but seemingly from a slip-up from Trevor Gammon, that's the console game director for Path of Exile 2, we got the news that the PoE2 beta will be starting in November, so we're about 5 months or so away from getting our hands on the game. It's been a long wait, but I'm sure it will be worth it in the end, and really I just want to play this game at this point. However, the topic of this video isn't about my excitement for Path of Exile 2, it's actually about my biggest concern for the game. I've had this concern for a long time, long before any of this co-op console stuff. This concern dates back to the moment that they announced WASD, which was quite a while ago now. You see, my biggest concern for Path of Exile 2 is the Keybind Conundrum that the game finds itself in. The sheer amount of keybinds that you will have playing this game. In Path of Exile 1, most of the builds have somewhere in the region of 3 or 4 to maybe 8 or 9 skills at the extreme end, and that's just the abilities that they need to use themselves. 1 for the main damage ability, 2 in the case of builds like Self-Cast Detonate Dead, then you'll typically have a movement skill or 2, and then a curse or maybe an Arcanist brand setup for curses or things like Flame Surge. Then you may even have some extra binds for supporting skills like banners, totems, or even self-cast guard skills or Frost Shield and the likes. Most builds will end up in that 3 to 9 ability count. That's not including automated skills, those are just the abilities that you need to use yourself, and realistically a lot of builds are on the lower end of that count. Because what you find is that in Path of Exile 1, most of the players will try to automate as many of these abilities as possible. Things like Mana Forged Arrows, Cast on Crit, Mark on Hit, even the new Automate and Call to Arms supports. All of these things are very popular. We even have most of the Flasks being automated as well thanks to Instilling Orbs. And getting to a place where most things are automated is a comfort thing. People just want to blast, they want to load into maps and kill monsters. They don't want to be playing keyboard piano using a bunch of different keybinds all of the time. And this is my biggest concern for Path of Exile 2, because the new systems and the game direction for Path of Exile 2 are exacerbating this problem twofold. First, the new gem socket system, which will allow all builds to have a bunch of potential 6 links, and that system is in place to help support the other exacerbating factor, which is that Path of Exile 2's combat system is designed around combo abilities. Skills which are designed to work in tandem with one another. For example, you use one ability to gain a power charge, then you spend those power charges on another ability to empower it and freeze an enemy in the process, then you use a third ability to deal a lot more damage to that enemy because they're frozen. This new combat system means that the average build will naturally have more abilities to use, because one-button builds like those that exist in Path of Exile 1 right now probably won't have anywhere near the effectiveness of a build using combination abilities to deal damage. But that's not the only thing that's causing keybind pressure in Path of Exile 2, because we also have WASD, which by all accounts is going to be the way you'll want to play this game, especially if you're looking to play melee. WASD is going to give you a lot more freedom of movement during combat, but that's 4 additional keybinds on top of the extra keybinds already coming in from abilities. And we're still not done, because we know that Path of Exile 2's Flask system is going to be significantly different to PoE1, in that it will be a more reactionary system rather than a proactive system. So instead of keeping a bunch of utility flasks active all the time while mapping, which is done most of the time in PoE1 right now for a lot of players, automated with instilling orbs, you'll be using flasks instead to deal with something during gameplay, such as this Path of Exile 2 antidote flask right here that you'll be wanting to use when you get poisoned. Now, during the Couch Co-op event in LA, Jonathan Rogers sat down with a handful of creators for one-on-one interviews, and one of those interviews was with GhazzyTV, a great interview with some very important questions asked. I'll link that full interview below if you're interested. During this interview, Ghazzy asked a question about this exact topic, the sheer amount of keybinds in Path of Exile 2. This is a fairly long question and an even longer answer from Jonathan, but I wanted to include the full segment in this video. So if you've already heard this question or you've watched Ghazzy's interview before, you can skip ahead about 2.5 minutes. Here we go.
Another question is something that I genuinely felt was a concern for me playing on a controller, and it is the quantity of keybinds.
Yes, sure.
24 keybinds on a controller, and it feels like it's just so much. So are you guys having any concerns with the quantity of keybinds moving forward with the game, where you guys are happy with the number
So the reason why there's so many on controllers is because there's quite a lot of things that you wouldn't consider to be keybinds on the PC version. So on the PC version, you'd say you've got 8 binds plus another 8 for the control. Is it another 5, I suppose? The mouse click one.
Yes,
change,
5.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, so 5. So you've got 13. So you might look at that and go, okay, why has he got 13 on PC and then you've got 24 on console? And it's because, okay, well, one of them's taken up by the thing that changes from one binding set to the other.
Yeah.
One of them's taken up by the button that turns item hovers on and off. One of them's taken up by the button that turns the map on and off. The reason why they're bindable is because you want to be able to configure where they go on the controller. And when you start the game, we don't want to hide those away the thing where you have to hold down left trigger. But we want you to be able to put them there once you kind of know about them and you put them there yourself, so that you can use those the D-pad buttons for other things. Yeah. So effectively, there's so many binds so that you can put all those things that you wouldn't consider to normally be binds in those things. But that being said, you do run into some sort of concerns on PC sometimes with the number of binds. I have run into it myself. You effectively have so you've got your 9 skill slots, but you've also got often a skill on a weapon. Maybe you've got even another skill on a shield or something like that. Which can lead to 11 things, and you've got 8 binds. So the assumption really there is that you're going to be using at least 1 or 2 skills that are things like heralds and stuff like that are going to be things that don't really require any binding. And the intention, therefore, is you end up with about 8 actual skills that you're going to have to use. And that should be true for most builds. You can sort of overflow that into more on PC, and then on controller, you really should have enough no matter what you're doing because there's so many binds there. But that's really just the complete configuration you've got. Now the stuff, once again, another thing you wouldn't normally consider to be binding on controller is flasks. So we have the meta flask buttons, which are use any health flask, use any life flask, and those are kind of what you start out with by default. But if you want to be using a flask for for staunching or something like that, then you probably want a specific bind for that, and you can put that anywhere, and you're likely to put it on some kind of D-pad combo or something like that. And once again, those are extra binds that you're going to need, extra things that you want to do. So yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it actually really isn't when you consider that. Okay, in PoE you've got those that number, and then you've also got the flasks. You've also got Z for minion. Sorry, not for highlighting. You've got the map button, tab. There's all these other things really, and so you add that all up, it starts to add up to a lot.
Okay, so this is a great question from Ghazzy, and there's a lot to unpack here in Jonathan's answer. He begins talking about controllers and how a lot of those binds are things that you wouldn't consider to be normal keybinds on a mouse and keyboard, which actually makes a lot of sense. But what about the keybind problem for the people that aren't going to be playing with a controller? Well, Jonathan goes on to say that he's found that keybinds have been a bit of a problem on mouse and keyboard sometimes because of the amount of skills a character may have. And he then goes on to say that the intention is that a character will have around 8 skills that they will have to actually use themselves, going as far to say that this should be true for most builds. Now, I've got to say that this sounds completely absurd to me. 8 keybinds just for abilities on most builds. With WASD, you're already up to 12 keybinds, and if you're including your flasks on top of that as well, that is a lot of keybinds. This just seems like way too much. I think the controls for Path of Exile 1 are actually quite balanced just how they are right now, with mouse movement and clicks for abilities or picking up loot, whilst your ability selection and potential flask usage is assigned to the keyboard. But for Path of Exile 2, it appears to be incredibly imbalanced, with movement moving over to the keyboard with WASD on top of a bunch of additional ability keybinds, while the mouse is left with just character-facing direction and loot clicking. Which is why I have the impression that a MOBA or even an MMO-type mouse with all of the extra buttons on the thumb will be almost mandatory for playing Path of Exile 2 with a mouse and keyboard, just to make the gameplay feel more comfortable. I also got an interesting comment here from Andrew Ding 8883 who said, "Another interesting thing to note is that all of the straight lines like paths and corridors are actually diagonal, so in order to move you have to press 2 of the WASD for most of the time, whereas other games you'll usually press 1 with the occasional 2 to move diagonally." Now this is actually something that I hadn't even considered about Path of Exile's map layouts, and he's right. All of the corridors or pathways are diagonal, and you don't really acknowledge or even notice this too much in Path of Exile 1 because the mouse movement is the same no matter how you're moving. But for WASD, this is actually quite relevant. Having to press 2 of these movement binds for a large majority of the gameplay is only going to add to that pressure. This is definitely a big concern of mine, my perceived problem with Path of Exile 2's keybinds, and how many of those keybinds you'll have on a mouse and keyboard setup. But with all of that said, I'm still super excited to get in and just play this game. It feels like we've been waiting forever to get our hands on Path of Exile 2, and it looks like it's finally going to be happening in 5 months' time, in November 2024. I can't wait for that. I'll close out this video with a poll that I put out yesterday asking you how you're feeling about Path of Exile 2 following all of the recent news, and the large majority have said they're optimistic about the game, and honestly, most of the concerns in the comment section of that poll were about this exact keybind issue. So let's hope I'm wrong about it and keybinds on mouse and keyboard won't be too much of a problem after all. What do you think? Am I overthinking the amount of keybinds on mouse and keyboard for Path of Exile 2? Is this solved by just having a mouse with a few extra thumb buttons? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you to my patrons for your ongoing support of this channel, it's very much appreciated. And thank you for watching this video. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.